What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever gotten? I knew the moment I saw that message in my inbox that my plan was working. It was a cold Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping black coffee, still shaking from anxiety. The subject line on my laptop read, "Important Review ASAP." My heart nearly stopped as I clicked it open. Inside was the proof I'd been waiting for, evidence of everything my coworker Jason had been doing behind the scenes for the last year. It had taken months of careful planning to reach this point, and I remember clearly when it all started going wrong. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm, and Jason had been hired just a couple of years after me. From day one, he made it clear he wanted to climb the ladder faster than anyone. He had that smarmy grin and always acted like a friend at first, but soon I realized he was the type who stepped on everyone to get ahead. Back then, I was thrilled to get promoted to project manager. It was my first big break, and I poured my heart into my work. Jason came onto my team shortly after, and we initially got along, sort of. I treated him like a colleague, trusted his instincts, and even helped him with ideas, but very quickly, I could sense something was off. Our boss. Mrs. Clark was strict but fair, and she liked good results. As project manager, I headed the launch of a new marketing campaign for a big client. The pressure was intense, but I had a great team. Among them was Jason, who always had an idea or two. I was happy to credit him and collaborate after all teamwork. That is, until the campaign went live, and it became clear we had a data breach in the final report. The week our campaign launched, we discovered some of our clients' confidential data had been exposed in the public report I had compiled. The email arrived at 7:45 a.m. and was blunt. My whole report was wrong. Worse, Mrs. Clark was furious. My stomach dropped as I read her note scolding me for such a mistake. How could I miss that? It took a few minutes for me to calm down enough to think the data leak wasn't a random glitch. When I went back through everything, I realized that someone had changed a line of code in the spreadsheet, and it was subtle. A single comma moved, a value shifted. This wasn't an accident. My mind immediately turned to Jason. He had the technical skills to do it, and more importantly, had access to the file before submission. He had been unusually quiet that morning, playing the innocent. By the time I confronted him in private, he just shrugged and said, "Hey, mistakes happen, right?" I remember feeling my face flush with anger. I wanted to scream at him that it wasn't innocent, that his negligence could cost my job, but I bit my tongue. Mrs. Clark demanded answers the moment she saw our stunned faces in the conference room. Later that morning, I was about to speak up and suggest we audit the changes, but before I could, Jason piped in with that smug look, saying, "It must have been a formatting issue." I checked the data sources myself. I watched as Mrs. Clark nodded at him, gratitude in her eyes that he was taking charge. She told me to assist him in fixing the report. I wanted to yell, "No, I did everything right, Jason messed it up." But in that moment, I realized something I'd been ignoring. My boss trusted him more. I kept quiet, and over the next few days, we worked to fix the campaign. In the end, it was me who discovered the exact change, the missing comma. But by then, Jason had already been praised for catching the issue. The campaign went on and was successful, but I felt hollow watching him get the kudos for what had been my error. It was a bitter lesson, but not one that made me give up. Instead, it made me vigilant. From that day on, I started keeping backups of everything I touched. I watched Jason closely whenever a file went missing, or when he had to rewrite something. I would casually check my own saved versions to see what had changed. It was as if I was a detective suddenly aware of a suspect in a cold case. At first, it was small things, modified presentations, or changed numbers in spreadsheets. Each time I caught him, I'd have a private conversation and he'd smile and act clueless. "Oh, looks like I was working on it." "Sorry." When I pointed out, he just said, "No worries, I'm just trying to help." When we reported back to Mrs. Clark, she'd always believe him. Slowly, I sensed that something was wrong at a bigger level. Projects not getting correctly implemented, budgets thrown off. But whenever I tried to talk to Mrs. Clark, she mostly brushed it off as team miscommunication. I remember one incident clearly. There was a team meeting where we discussed quarterly budgets. Jason casually passed a rough budget to our boss and said we were in the red. Thanks to my miscalculations, I had double-checked those numbers the night before, so I knew they were accurate. But suddenly Mrs. Clark was frowning at me. In front of the entire team, she said, "This is a serious discrepancy. We need to fix it immediately." I sat there numb, watching as Jason took the lead, and I was sidelined. That night, I nearly tore my room apart trying to figure out what to do. I thought about confronting him directly, but every time I imagined it, he would just get that grin, and I couldn't handle another angry meeting with our boss. I tried talking to Mrs. Clark once, subtly hinting that something odd was happening, but she just told me to sort it out with the team. She still valued results and didn't want office drama. I felt trapped. It was late October, and my team had been pulling all-nighters on our new prototype. We were finishing slides for the big presentation to the directors. I thought maybe I was finally ready. Jason hovered behind me, unusually quiet. I assumed he wanted to double-check something. With the deadline looming, I welcomed any help. Our team was close, and I trusted Jason completely. He'd always been supportive, never giving me reason to doubt him. It never occurred to me he might betray us. My heart jumped as our boss's assistant tapped on the door. Directors arriving in minutes. We scrambled, and I hit present on my laptop, expecting our title slide to glow, but nothing happened. The screen stayed black. I tapped again. Still nothing. A blinking cursor mocked me. Panic hit. The team fidgeted behind me. Jason cleared his throat. "You got it?" he asked calmly. I'm trying," I stammered, clicking frantically. The projector flickered, but the slides never appeared. Cold sweat beaded on my neck. Suddenly, the door burst open. My boss stormed in with the directors. They nodded. I forced a grin. "We're ready," I said, voice shaking. "Just a moment," I lied, trying to sound confident. I restarted the file, heart pounding. Instead, the laptop bleeped an error and locked. My face burned. I jabbed at the keys. It was working fine a minute ago, I muttered. Silence was suffocating all eyes on me as I pounded the keyboard. Jason hovered beside me. Our boss barked. "We need that file," I choked out. "I know I'm trying." My fingers flew. A director reminded us of the schedule, I muttered. Maybe the file got corrupted. I tried the backup copy. Nothing. My heart sank. The project folder was empty. All my work gone. My boss barked. "What happened here? The files were here yesterday. Are you telling me you lost the project?" My throat went dry. I said nothing. The team stared at the blank screen. Jason shook his head slowly. Our eyes met. His gaze was too calm, almost calculating. My stomach twisted. No, I told myself he's a friend. I must be imagining it. Maria burst in. "This can't be right," she gasped. "The backup ran all night, how?" She turned to me. "Your computer was fine last night, right? I felt sick. I hadn't told anyone, but my laptop had crashed a few times. I'd brushed it off. Now I regretted it." My boss folded his arms. "Explain how a project disappears overnight," he demanded. My head pounded. All that work gone, and I was standing there as the prime suspect. Then Jason spoke, all calm. "Maybe run an antivirus scan or something. Shit happens, right?" He gave a gentle smile. Rage stabbed me. How could he act so clueless? I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came. A knock rattled the door. The assistant poked her head in. "The directors need to start the next meeting," she said. The directors exchanged looks. "Well, have to reschedule one," said. My chest tightened. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but the words felt hollow. The boss grabbed his jacket. "Well, reconvene later," he growled, then left. After they left, silence settled like a weight. We sat frozen. The team filed out quietly. Jason lingered at the door, fidgeting with his tie, then slipped away. I slid down in my chair, shaking Maria, placed 2 water bottles on the table and sat beside me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "They're all looking at you like you did it." My eyes burned. I hated feeling so helpless. "Maybe it's not my fault," I murmured. Maria squeezed my shoulder. "None of us would do this on purpose. Something's wrong here." I looked up. Jason was closing the door behind him. He shot me a cold glance. A chill raced down my spine. In the empty break room, I pressed my face into my hands. A message from Jen lit my phone. "You got this, babe." My throat tightened. How could I explain this to her? I swiped the message away without replying. Marcus, one of the senior engineers, walked in with donuts and sat across from me. He watched me quietly for a moment, then asked, "Kid, what's wrong?" I shook my head. I thought I was ready for that meeting, and now it's all gone. I whispered, "Our entire project is gone." He shook his head. "No, this doesn't add up. Files don't just vanish. Maybe someone did this intentionally." My voice hitched. But who would do that? I asked, voice barely there. I wanted to bolt out of the office and never come back. But Marcus gave me a sad, concerned look. He clearly didn't think I was responsible. And then it clicked. Last night, Jason had offered to help me sync our project to the cloud. I'd brushed him off. Now half our code and slides were missing. My stomach twisted. "Jason's gone already." I croaked. Marcus nodded. "Doctor's appointment," he said. Alone, everything crashed down on me. I covered my face and wept. Humiliation, frustration, heartbreak. All our work felt gone. I forced myself outside a few minutes later. The cool autumn air hit my face. My phone buzzed, another text from Jen. "You okay? I love you." Her faith cut through the despair. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about a project. It was about everyone who believed in me. Anger coiled in my chest. "No," I whispered, "I'm not giving up." If I walked away now, those late nights would have meant nothing. I checked the backup logs on my phone. A timestamp jumped out 10 minutes after Jason had been at my desk. Not proof, but enough to show I wasn't crazy. Someone had tampered with our work. For the first time that day, I felt clear-headed. Someone had tried to break me well. I wasn't going to let them. I squared my shoulders and headed back in. I would find out the truth. This wasn't over. Finally, after one too many of these incidents, I hit my breaking point. I decided I needed hard evidence. Jason had been illegally sharing our client list with another company for a kickback. I found an email on our shared drive that was addressed to some shady marketing firm. It was clear he was colluding with a competitor, selling our most confidential data bit by bit. The moment I discovered that something inside me snapped, this wasn't just workplace rivalry. It was outright betrayal and theft of my years of hard work, and I knew I had to do something. But I didn't act rashly. That would be too easy for him to cover up. Instead, I started gathering evidence piece by piece. I copied email chains, took screenshots of file changes, and backed them up in a secret folder on a personal drive. I also monitored him on Slack and email, staying online late to see if he emailed the list again. Over several weeks, I built a case. It wasn't easy. He was careful and knew I suspected something, which made him more cautious at times. He also occasionally tried to tie me up in meetings or tasks just to keep me busy. It felt like a cat-and-mouse game. There were nights I stayed awake obsessing over every detail, marking times, dates, and crafting a timeline of his actions. The image of him getting promoted or taking credit as he deserved was slowly turning into a plan to expose him. One especially tense moment came when he noticed I was backing up that new campaign file of his. He walked over as if by chance while I had two screens open, one showing a saved copy of the file before his changes. "Preparing for the big pitch, boss's boy," he said with a mocking grin. I felt my heart thumping, but I calmly minimized the extra window. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Yeah, just making sure everything goes smoothly on the presentation." He snorted. "Good," he said, "because you need me to fix any last-minute screw-ups." I just gave him a tight smile and turned back to my work. That exchange had me seething. How could he talk down to me like that, so sure that I needed him? I realized then I had to flip the power dynamic. He saw me as inferior, but I was about to prove otherwise. Finally, the day came. Our big pitch to land a massive new client. It was the kind of presentation that could propel our careers. I had spent days preparing, and Jason was going to help present. We walked into the conference room on Friday morning, nerves buzzing. Everyone from management was present, including Mrs. Clark. As we started the presentation, I led off with my initial slides and narration. Everything went smoothly until Jason took over to talk about our client research. He had the floor. I noticed after he skipped some slides that had detailed market analysis. Those slides were in the deck, but he breezed past them. When I glanced down, I saw he was quietly deleting content from the slides on his computer. I tapped into action. Unbeknownst to him, I had prepared 2 versions of the deck. One was the full deck with all our hard work. The other was a tampered deck with errors. I had modified it discreetly, adding mistakes to key numbers and leaving out our strongest data points. I gave him that deck when we started. He was using it to present. Suddenly the big client, Mr. Thompson, frowned and pointed at one of his slides. The projected chart behind us was showing a completely wrong market size, off by millions. My stomach dropped. Jason sputtered, sorry. Looks like a glitch." His face was pale. I, however, pretended to be shocked along with everyone else, turning the presentation back to myself. "Oh, wow," I exclaimed. "Looks like some of our data got mixed up." I swiftly connected my laptop to the projector under the pretense of fixing it. In reality, I opened the second correct deck on my computer and projected it instead. "Let's try that again," I said. The slide jumped back to the accurate numbers. The room's reaction changed immediately. The client raised his eyebrows, looking between me and Jason. Jason, red-faced, kept muttering that he must have copied the wrong file. I, on the other hand, nodded sympathetically at him, then addressed the client. "My apologies for the confusion. Everyone, technical hiccups can happen." So, with the correct data, I guided the presentation to conclusion flawlessly. After we wrapped up, the client and Mrs. Clark shared glances and gave thumbs up. "Great job, you two," Mrs. Clark said, but I noticed she seemed more impressed by how I had handled the mix-up calmly than anything else. Jason stayed silent, and I felt a thrill knowing he couldn't take credit for that recovery. It had been me. After the meeting, Mrs. Clark pulled me aside in the hallway. "I'm really proud of how you stepped up in there," she whispered. I smiled quietly. Thanks, it was quite the surprise. Meanwhile, I caught Jason walking away, shoulders slumped, not meeting my eyes. That evening, Jason came by my desk with a funny look. "Nice saving the meeting," he said, trying to sound casual. I pretended not to let it bother me. "Just doing my job," I said lightly. He tried to push it. Seriously, though I don't know how that happened with the slides. I looked at him carefully. A slow grin spread on my face. "I do," I said softly, and walked off to leave him wondering. Inside, my head was buzzing with satisfaction, but I wasn't done yet. I knew from past whispers in the office that none of the senior folks had proof of his shady dealings. I needed to ensure he couldn't just brush me off with, "Oh, he was just helping like usual." So the next morning, I took a risky step. I walked into Mrs. Clark's office and asked if we could discuss a potential security breach. She looked up concerned. "What's going on?" she asked. I explained calmly that after witnessing the market data glitch, I had decided to audit our systems on my own time. I said I found evidence that someone had been altering our confidential files. I didn't name Jason right away. I wanted her open to listening. She was tense. "Who would do that?" she asked. I met her gaze. "I have a suspicion, but I wanted you to see it for yourself." I handed her a USB drive. "These are copies of internal communications and file logs from the last 6 months. I figured I'd better have something concrete." She took the drive, eyebrows furrowed. "I can't ignore this," she said softly. "Thank you for bringing it to me. Well, get it to verify these." She promised to keep it discreet and maybe involve higher-ups. I left that meeting feeling vulnerable but also unstoppable. I knew once I gave her the evidence, she would have no choice but to act. The following days were tense. I kept working normally, not wanting to tip off Jason. When I walked past his cubicle, I gave a quiet, "Hey, Jason," and he barely acknowledged me. That was fine. A day later, IT came to me. They were looking into the breach and had some questions about last week's presentation deck. I gave them a vague but truthful answer about using two files and assured them I might have caused some confusion to see if systems responded. By Friday afternoon, the wheels were in motion. I was in a meeting with Mrs. Clark, HR, and two people from IT. They were looking at me intensely as I recounted the timeline showing logs of file access, times corresponding to when I was around or not, the email forwards, etc. There was no mention of Jason yet, but I could tell the pieces were falling in place. Then, surprisingly, they brought Jason in. I locked eyes with him over the table. He looked stricken, as if understanding this was about him. One of the IT guys asked him to explain some of the anomalies. Jason tried to laugh it off, making excuses. "Maybe I opened something by accident. I didn't have time to go through all these files." His voice trembled slightly, and Mrs. Clark shot him a glare. I watched as each person looked at the data, then back at Jason. Mrs. Clark turned red with anger. "You were selling our client list to our competitor," she accused quietly but firmly. Jason suddenly slumped down in his seat, shock written all over his face. "No, wait, that's not what I—" But the HR guy had already started taking notes. They looked between me and Jason. I stayed quiet and let him twist. It was not my place to interrogate him further. In the end, the evidence spoke for itself. Within an hour, we ended the meeting with a decision. Jason was being let go for gross misconduct. He was escorted out of the building immediately. I remember my heart thumping as they led him away. He caught my eyes one last time. There was desperation there, mixed with shame. He opened his mouth as if to say something to me, but the security guard closed the door. I took a long breath and walked out of the building, feeling sunlight hit my face for the first time all day. For weeks afterward, the office was a different place without Jason. People came by to thank me for exposing the fraud. Even Mrs. Clark gave me extra work and praise in public meetings. I never bragged, but inside it felt satisfying. It was strange feeling like I'd won something. Not the promotion, not even respect, but vindication. The last piece of revenge happened about a month later. I was checking my email and saw a forwarded message in which the competitor's VP apologized to our firm. They had no idea they were buying stolen lists, and since it became public knowledge, they had offered to give our company a cut for any future clients to help salvage the deal. It was almost poetic justice. Jason's silly scheme not only cost him his job, but he'd accidentally opened the door to a better partnership for us. A few weeks after Jason was fired, I finally let myself breathe again. The office felt almost peaceful without the constant tension he brought. I was still in shock, to be honest. Some days I'd glance at an empty desk and half expect him to suddenly pop up with that condescending smile. It took a while before the victory felt real. One morning I ended up back at the kitchen table early, sipping my coffee, looking at the sunrise through the window. I remember thinking how strange it was that a routine morning could feel so much different. When I used to see the sun rise, it meant gearing up for another day of battling Jason's antics. Now I could relax into it, and a weird warmth spread through me. The memory of that silent hallway as he was escorted away still felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Later that week, I met up with my best friend, Jess. She and I met in college, and she's one of the few people I trust completely with my secrets. We sat in our favorite cafe corner, the smell of coffee and freshly baked muffins around us. Jess reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "So, tell me everything," she said with a gentle smile. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. How I had noticed the little changes in documents, how the budget meeting went south, and especially how I discovered the stolen client list. I saw tears welling up in Jess's eyes when I mentioned the betrayal part. "I can't believe he did that to you," she said quietly, hugging her cardigan tighter. By the time I told her the part about the final presentation and how I switched decks, Jess's jaw had dropped. I realized I hadn't even mentioned that part yet, not because I didn't want to brag, but because it almost felt like cheating. But it was one of the moments I was proud of. She was leaning forward, hanging on every detail. "So you just smiled and took over?" she gasped out, astonished. I nodded. "Yeah." He was fumbling so badly I knew we were losing the client. It was either step in or watch everything blow up. Jess nodded approvingly. "I'm proud of you." That took guts. I shrugged modestly. Jess took a sip of her latte and said softly, "You know, I always knew you had that kind of smarts. But I have to ask, do you feel bad? I mean, seeing him get fired?" She looked at me seriously. It was a good question. I paused, looking at the cream swirling in my coffee. The truth was, I felt all sorts of things. Honestly, I started, choosing my words. At first, I felt guilty. He was a colleague, you know? But then, remembering everything I watched him do, I just felt relieved more than anything, like we finally got justice, and I learned something about myself too. I never thought I could plan something like that. Jess shook her head with a grin. "Not something I ever doubted, but still," she chuckled, raising her cup. "It seems like in the end you really got the last laugh." I gave a small laugh too. "I guess I did. But you know, Jess, I also felt a little sad when the whole thing was over. It's weird, but he was kind of my nemesis. Without him around, the day kind of feels empty." Jess nodded, understanding. "That sounds normal, actually," she said. "Like losing an archenemy, you know? It's strange to feel weirdly lost when you don't have someone to rail against." I nodded again. It was odd, but every superhero story has its villain, right? And villains are surprisingly memorable when they're gone. We sat there a while, just talking about everyday stuff, like how work had been going now that the drama was over. I told her how Mrs. Clark had quietly hinted at a promotion next quarter, how coworkers kept thanking me in the hallway, and how I was finally being included in meetings on equal footing. It was like I was being seen as a leader now, not just some underling. Jess beamed, clearly happy for me. Before we left the cafe, she put her hand on my shoulder. "You've learned a tough lesson," she said softly. "But sometimes standing up for yourself the right way is what you need. You handled it well." I nodded. "Yeah, it feels good in a sense, but I wouldn't want any more revenge stories in my life. One was enough." Driving home afterward, I reflected on how much had changed. I realized that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't about extravagant acts. It's about doing what's right and watching the truth come out. Jason had almost gotten away with so much. All it took was persistence and some cunning to stop him. And even though I still feel a twinge when I think of how happy his dismissal made me, I also understand that I am a different,